the things that people are going through to, get their kids into the, national fencing competition and, to curate every experience of their lives and to protect them from all conceivable risks. I mean, some of it can be helpful to kids, but a lot of it just clearly isn't. A lot of it's driven by this overwhelming anxiety. So that's what drew me into it. And there's a pretty short and simple analysis that I think explains most of it, not everything. It turns out that if you look at the sociological evidence across countries, countries that have high inequality tend to develop these kinds of extreme parenting practices. And then countries where there's a greater degree of equality or a higher sense of fairness, the parents take a somewhat more relaxed attitude. I don't think that means that they're bad parents. I just think it means that they don't feel that intense pressure to make sure that the kids move ahead. And I guess the final really important aspect of this is that for a small group of people in our society, it can make sense. So if you are in that 9.9%, maybe in the top 2 or 3%, you can afford the everything you need for supreme parenting. You can get the nanny, and maybe you can pay for the private school, and you can buy that, educational holiday in the Galapagos or whatever it is that you need to make sure that the little one is the perfect child. But it's pretty unrealistic for most of American society. And the problem is that a huge part of American society is bought into that value system, but they don't have the money to pay for it. And there's this kind of unwillingness to recognize that we're setting up a model that's supposed to work, in some fantasy land, but won't actually work in real life.
There's also just, to me, the narcissism of it is a little perplexing. Like, my child needs to be the perfect, there's a striving, and that's why I guess you can categorize it as an aristocracy in that sliver of the population. Like, there is like this idea to not just keep up with the Joneses, but to present your child almost as a human trophy of your wealth or your status, I guess. And it's just not that way, even though those same standards are applied to the rest of the population. It's just not the way. It's not feasible.
Yeah, no, you said a couple of things that really get me worked out. Very interesting. Narcissism, first of all, let me just say in a general way, there's plenty of evidence historically and culturally to suggest that there is a strong connection between these kinds of narcissistic disorders and rising inequality, because people understand that as the competition gets more intense and as it gets less fair, they need to build up these identities and then protect them. And so you get this kind of narcissism in this context. Then the other thing that you mentioned, which is really critical to understand, is social mobility. So the backstory about the United States is that this is the land of the free, and you can make it if you try. And we're super mobile is the story. The facts are completely different from that. It turns out that our social mobility is substantially lower than that of many other countries that historically have had low social mobility. So we're lower than most of the European countries, certainly lower than Germany and the Scandinavian countries. We're lower than Japan. We're lower than Canada. And a significant aspect of that is it turns out that the least mobile people of all are the people in the top 10% and in the bottom 10%. And as far as the top 10% goes, it's pretty straightforward how that's happened. We've got a wonderful selective university system that produces fantastic educations, but it is and it makes an effort to include some representatives from the bottom, but overwhelmingly it's serving that top decile. In addition, there are other advantages that these families on top can offer their offspring: the connections, the residential locations, the color of their skin to some extent, and all these things lead to a pretty low, relatively low degree of mobility compared to other countries. And unfortunately, it turns out that, again, as inequality rises, this effect becomes stronger. The richer groups are effectively even better able to protect their status and entrench themselves. So that's a big story about what's happening now.
You mentioned the university system. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit. I mean, we covered, I guess, the first half of it, which is the curating of the child's experience to lead them to the eventual pinnacle of the college experience, which better be an amazing one, because that reflects on me as the parent. And that's also, I think, an identifiable trait if we're looking at this group sociologically.
Yeah, so education is really critical to this whole story. I mean, it's part of the narrative of the group as a whole. I mean, there are many narratives. The most important one is that we're special because we're educated. That education gives us merit, distinguishes us, and it explains why we earn so much money. The facts don't really support that, but more than that, more importantly, they also distract from a more real and less fortunate narrative about the United States education over the last century. So one of the big accomplishments of the U.S. Starting in the mid-19th century was to create a public university system. And I think by the middle of the 20th century, or the third quarter of the 20th century, it was successful in a limited way. It was obviously discriminatory in many ways, but it nonetheless provided public higher education to a large group of people and increased social mobility. What's happened in the last 30, 40 years is a significant reversal. We still have public universities, except they're not really public. They're mostly paid for, or at least more than half is paid for now by students. And then even worse, we've kind of created a privatized segment within the public universities, sort of super elite sections that behave like private universities. Then we have a private selective university system on the side. So the net result is that instead of having a public higher education system that we were developing for a while, and as a number of other countries have, we have an effectively privatized system that works very well for a small number of people that make it to the top, works reasonably well for wealthy people who are able to push their kids through, and then saddles significant numbers of the broad mass of Americans who pursue higher education with excessive debt and inadequate career prospects. So the education system, from being a kind of engine of mobility, has turned into an engine of class reproduction. And just as a final point on this, is why I think it's interesting to focus on the 9.9%. When you talk about to people within this group who are aspiring to it, they tend to think that the university issue is purely about admissions to these super selective universities. Who gets into Harvard and so on. And that's an example of an incredibly inward focused, narrow perspective on the problem. Those selective universities represent a very small part of our university system. They're really relevant only for how they explain the ways in which the rest of the thing is kind of screwed up. So, and it's that kind of blindness, that idea that, well, we can solve all the problems by tweaking the admissions policies of the Ivy League or something like that, is, I think, part of the problem that we face.
I mean, it's like pretty much most of college that applies to like this specific, the selectiveness that also codifies like these same class standards for the 9.9%. I mean, it's, as you say, it's systemic. It's not just the Ivy League, and like that's why I get, I'm so cynical sometimes, but I see like feel good stories about, this kid came from nothing and went to this school, and like that exact class of people cheers on that kind of individual story and makes a movie out of it and options it immediately. It's just like, that's just built to reinforce the fact that you think that the way that you're participating in society is somewhat earned and special.
Yeah, I mean, you're so right. And those stories, honestly, they are inspiring. I shed a tear over them too. I mean, they're good. I mean, in themselves, it's wonderful. If you see, a young person with no advantages, their father was an unemployed taxi driver or whatever, and they make it through and they get the scholarships. I think that's fantastic. And I wouldn't want to disparage those, but you're right. Those narratives, they're the Horatio Alger, rags to riches things that ultimately are used to validate an unjust system. I mean, it's that's why it's important to step back and look at the bigger numbers and see how many Horatios there are out there, and how many people are basically are not going to make it that way.